This past September marked a turning point in the global technology landscape. Japan made an extraordinary move, placing 110 Chinese enterprises on its export restriction roster in a single sweeping action. The scope of this decision was staggering. These weren't just random businesses, they represented the cutting edge of modern innovation. Semiconductor manufacturers, artificial intelligence developers, quantum computing researchers, and even producers of advanced cooling systems designed to prevent microchips from overheating during operation. International observers noted something striking about Japan's decision. Several prominent Western news organizations characterized these export controls as going further than anything Washington itself had implemented. The measures were being described as the most comprehensive restrictions ever placed on Chinese technological advancement by any nation outside the United States. But here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. China's response to this challenge left Tokyo in a position it hadn't anticipated. The countermeasures deployed by Beijing exposed vulnerabilities in Japan's industrial foundation that few had fully appreciated until now. This raises critical questions that we need to explore. What motivated Japan to take such drastic action against its largest trading partner? What forces are operating behind the scenes of this technological confrontation? And perhaps most importantly, what tools does China possess to respond to these restrictions, and how far is it willing to go? If you're interested in understanding the forces shaping our technological and economic future, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss our deep dive investigations into global affairs. Now, let's unpack this complex and consequential story. The new oil. Why semiconductors matter. To understand what's happening between Japan and China, we first need to grasp why semiconductors have become the most contested resource of the 21st century. Industry experts often call semiconductors the oil of the information age, and this comparison isn't just rhetoric. Just as petroleum powered the Industrial Revolution and shaped geopolitical alliances throughout the 20th century, semiconductors now determine which nations will lead in the digital era. Control over semiconductor materials, manufacturing capabilities, and design expertise translates directly into technological superiority. This advantage extends beyond commercial success into the realm of national security, military capabilities, and economic sovereignty. Nations without advanced semiconductor industries find themselves dependent on others for everything from smartphones to weapon systems. This reality explains why, beginning in 2022, the United States launched a comprehensive campaign to limit China's progress in semiconductor development. The American strategy was methodical and far-reaching. It targeted every stage of the semiconductor supply chain, from the raw materials used in chip production to the sophisticated machinery required for manufacturing the most advanced processors. The numbers tell the story of this campaign's scale. To date, more than 15,000 Chinese companies and research institutions have been added to U.S. restricted entity lists. These organizations face severe limitations on their ability to purchase American technology, software, and components. The impact has reverberated throughout China's technology sector, forcing companies to seek alternatives and accelerate domestic development programs. America's allies join the campaign. Washington has never struggled to find partners willing to support its strategic initiatives, and the campaign against China's semiconductor industry proved no exception. The Netherlands, a crucial U.S. ally in Europe and home to ASML, the world's only manufacturer of extreme ultraviolet lithography machines, became an active participant in these restrictions. In a particularly dramatic move, Dutch authorities invoked national security provisions to forcibly take control of Nexperia, a semiconductor company with Chinese ownership. The government froze assets valued at approximately 14.7 billion yuan and initiated procedures to remove the company's Chinese management team. The message was clear. Even established business operations with Chinese connections would face extraordinary scrutiny and potential seizure. Japan's involvement in this coordinated effort escalated throughout the current year. In January, Tokyo announced new export control measures focusing on chip-related technologies and quantum computing systems. The Japanese government expanded its restrictions to include advanced manufacturing equipment and specialized software used in semiconductor production. Officials in Tokyo insisted publicly that these new rules would apply uniformly to all non-allied countries and weren't specifically designed to target China. However, the timing and substance of these measures made this claim difficult to accept. The restrictions clearly aligned with American strategic objectives, and China represented by far the largest affected party. The coordination between Washington and Tokyo became even more apparent when we examined the timing. That same January, the United States unveiled its own updated export control framework, introducing additional restrictions on advanced computing semiconductors. This new American regulation established a tiered system, categorizing countries based on their alliance relationships with the United States and assigning different levels of access to cutting-edge chips. China found itself placed in the most restrictive category, facing the highest barriers to obtaining advanced semiconductor technology. September's escalation: 110 companies blacklisted. By September, Japan moved beyond indirect coordination and took direct, unmistakable action. The government updated its export control list, adding 110 Chinese companies and institutions to its restricted entities roster in one comprehensive update. The breadth of this blacklist was remarkable, encompassing organizations working across multiple critical technology domains: semiconductor design and manufacturing, artificial intelligence development, lithography equipment production, and quantum computing research. What made Japan's approach particularly notable was its comprehensiveness compared to American restrictions. While U.S. export controls primarily focus on preventing China's access to the most advanced chips, typically those manufactured using processes of 7 nanometers or smaller, Japan's measures cast a much wider net. The restrictions encompass the entire semiconductor ecosystem, including supporting technologies and auxiliary equipment. Even seemingly peripheral items like chip cooling systems, which help manage the heat generated during processor operation, were brought under export controls. This detail reveals the thorough nature of Japan's strategy. Nothing that could potentially advance China's semiconductor capabilities would be exempted. Under this new framework, China and other non-allied nations face substantially more rigorous approval processes when seeking to import controlled technologies. But the restrictions don't stop there. Even countries on Japan's approved list must submit detailed documentation for review before exporting certain technologies. Japanese officials examine these applications to determine whether the equipment might be re-exported through third parties to China or other blacklisted nations, creating an additional layer of control designed to prevent circumvention. The timing of this Japanese action deserves special attention. Just before Japan announced its list of 110 restricted Chinese companies, the United States had, in that very same month, added 23 Chinese entities to its own export control list. 13 of these newly restricted organizations operated in the semiconductor and integrated circuit sectors, covering crucial links in the technology chain from initial chip design through manufacturing and supply chain logistics. Japan's decision to blacklist 110 companies within days of the American announcement was clearly not coincidental. This represented coordinated action aimed at maximizing pressure on China's semiconductor technology sector. Japanese officials have repeatedly emphasized their intention to harmonize their semiconductor export control policies with American standards, ensuring that both nations present a united front in restricting China's technological advancement. To understand Japan's motivations for these aggressive restrictions, we need to examine the dramatic transformation of its semiconductor industry over the past 4 decades. During the 1980s and into the 1990s, Japan stood as the undisputed leader in global semiconductor production. Major corporations like Toshiba, Hitachi, and NEC dominated the market, collectively controlling over half of all semiconductor sales worldwide. Japanese companies were synonymous with quality and innovation in electronics. However, this dominance proved temporary. As the industry entered the 2000s, Japan's position began to erode. South Korean Samsung and Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, known as TSMC, gradually captured market share through aggressive investment and technological innovation. These competitors specialized in different aspects of the semiconductor business than Japanese companies had emphasized, and their strategies proved more aligned with how the global industry evolved. Today, the situation has reversed dramatically. No Japanese semiconductor foundry possesses the capability to mass-produce chips using 7-nanometer manufacturing processes. This represents a significant technological gap. By contrast, China's Semiconductor Manufacturing International Corporation, or SMIC, has successfully produced 7-nanometer chip samples, demonstrating that it has achieved this crucial technological milestone. In this specific metric of manufacturing capability, Japan has actually fallen behind China. Japanese authorities recognized this dangerous trend and attempted to mount a comeback. In 2022, the government announced substantial support for Rapidus, a domestic semiconductor venture. Tokyo committed approximately $2.66 billion to help this company develop 2-nanometer process technology, which would represent the cutting edge of semiconductor manufacturing if achieved. However, even this ambitious project reveals Japan's dependent position. The core technologies that Rapidus plans to employ don't originate from Japanese research. Instead, they come from IBM, the American Technology Corporation. Furthermore, Rapidus doesn't expect to begin even pilot production until 2028. This timeline places Japan at least 5 years behind TSMC and Samsung in bringing advanced manufacturing capabilities online. The conclusion is stark. Japan, once a semiconductor powerhouse that defined industry standards, has been almost entirely sidelined from the development and production of the most advanced chips. This loss of position carries enormous economic and strategic implications. As Japan's semiconductor capabilities declined, its market position inevitably suffered. Chinese companies began competing directly with Japanese manufacturers across multiple product categories. And, the results have been devastating for Japanese firms. Consider the case of silicon carbide wafers, a specialized product used in power electronics and high-performance applications. 6-inch silicon carbide wafers were once a Japanese specialty product. Before 2020, a single 6-inch wafer commanded prices reaching $1,300. Chinese electronics manufacturers had no choice but to pay these premium prices. Moreover, they faced extended waiting periods. Companies needed to place orders up to 6 months in advance just to secure a position in the production queue. And even then, delivery wasn't guaranteed. The market today looks completely different. Multiple Chinese manufacturers have achieved mass production capability for 6-inch silicon carbide wafers. This increased supply has driven prices down dramatically to approximately $800 per wafer. That represents a reduction of nearly 40% compared to previous price levels. This sharp decline in pricing sent shockwaves through the global market. Japan's Rome company, a major producer of silicon carbide wafers, was forced to slash its prices to around $900 just to remain competitive. To preserve profit margins and maintain its market position, Rome urgently accelerated its development of 8-inch wafers, hoping that larger wafers would provide a technological edge that could justify premium pricing. Another instructive example involves Japan's JRC Foundry, which specialized in producing low-voltage MOSFET chips rated for under 100 volts. These components serve as essential building blocks in household appliances like air conditioners and refrigerators. Previously, these chips cost as much as 40,000 yen per 1,000 units. This high price severely compressed the profit margins of Chinese appliance manufacturers who depended on these imported components. But once Chinese semiconductor companies successfully began mass-producing chips with identical specifications, market dynamics shifted dramatically. Prices dropped directly to 18,000 yen per thousand units, representing a reduction of 55%. Driven by these substantial cost savings, Chinese appliance manufacturers increasingly switched from Japanese suppliers to domestic alternatives. The result for JRC Foundry was catastrophic. The company experienced a massive loss of orders and sustained ongoing financial losses as its customer base evaporated. Unable to compete with Chinese pricing while maintaining profitability, JRC Foundry declared bankruptcy in 2023, becoming a casualty of China's rising semiconductor capabilities. Japanese industry leaders understand the trajectory clearly. If action isn't taken to slow China's progress in semiconductor manufacturing, it's only a matter of time before Chinese low-cost chips dominate significant portions of the global market. This fear of displacement, combined with pressure from the United States to join its technological containment strategy, explains Japan's willingness to impose harsh export controls despite the potential economic consequences. Despite facing multiple rounds of technological restrictions from the United States and now Japan, China has consistently demonstrated its ability to implement effective countermeasures. When it comes to Japan's deliberate efforts to hinder Chinese technological development, Beijing certainly won't remain passive. China possesses leverage that few other nations can match, and that leverage centers on a category of materials called rare earth elements. Japan faces a fundamental vulnerability that shapes its entire industrial strategy, an extreme scarcity of natural resources. The country's limited land area and geological constraints mean that Japan's domestic mining capacity cannot support its industrial base. This forces Japan to import virtually all raw materials needed for manufacturing, creating dependencies that can be exploited by resource-rich trading partners. Rare earth elements represent one of Japan's most critical dependencies. These aren't actually rare in the sense of being scarce in Earth's crust, but they're difficult to extract and process economically. They're essential for manufacturing everything from smartphone screens to missile guidance systems. Reports indicate that historically, approximately 90% of Japan's rare earth supply originated from Chinese sources. This overwhelming dependence gave China enormous leverage over Japanese industry. According to the most recent available data, Japan's total rare earth imports in 2024 exceeded 8,300 tons. Of this total, more than 5,000 tons came from China. This means that even after efforts to diversify suppliers, Japan's dependence on Chinese rare earths remains above 60%. No other supplier can come close to matching China's combination of production capacity, processing capabilities, and competitive pricing. Since the beginning of this year, China has implemented stricter oversight of rare earth exports. Export licenses now face enhanced scrutiny, and approval processes have lengthened. This shift has prompted Japan to actively search for alternative suppliers, recognizing that continued heavy dependence on China creates strategic vulnerability. Japan first signed a cooperation agreement with the United States, aiming to strengthen its rare earth supply chain through economic incentives and joint investment in processing facilities. Tokyo has also expanded partnerships with countries including Australia and India, hoping to build a diversified supplier network that could collectively reduce dependence on Chinese rare earths. However, the fundamental problem remains insurmountable. Even if the United States, Australia, India, and Japan combine all their rare earth processing capabilities, their total capacity amounts to less than 1% of China's. This staggering disparity means that no realistic alternative supply chain can replace Chinese rare earths in the short to medium term. To address this vulnerability, Japan has also promoted development of rare earth recycling technologies. Through policy incentives and financial subsidies, the government encourages companies to build facilities that extract rare earth elements from discarded electronics, automobile components, and other products. While recycling can provide a modest supplementary source, it cannot come close to meeting Japan's total rare earth requirements for industrial production. This raises a critical question. What would happen if China decided to further tighten its approval process for rare earth exports to Japan, or significantly extend the approval timeline? What consequences would Japan face if Chinese rare earth supplies were substantially restricted or cut off entirely? Currently, nearly all of Japan's advanced industries depend heavily on rare earth materials. These elements aren't luxury items that can be foregone. They're essential inputs without readily available substitutes for many applications. If China were to impose comprehensive restrictions on rare earth exports to Japan, the impacts would cascade through the economy, but certain sectors would face truly catastrophic disruptions. The automotive industry would suffer the most immediate and severe blow. Producing a single new energy vehicle typically requires 2 to 3 kilograms of neodymium iron boron magnets, which are the most powerful permanent magnets available and essential for electric motor performance. The effectiveness of these magnets depends critically on adding the rare earth element dysprosium, which allows the magnets to maintain their properties at high temperatures. If dysprosium supplies were interrupted, major Japanese automakers including Toyota and Honda would be forced to halt production lines within weeks as existing inventories were exhausted. Japan currently holds roughly 15% of the global new energy vehicle market. This market share could be rapidly captured by Chinese, European, and American competitors within just 6 months if Japanese manufacturers couldn't deliver vehicles. If China maintained export restrictions for an extended period, Japan's automotive industry could face annual production losses exceeding $20 billion. Beyond the direct financial impact, Japanese automakers would lose hard-won market positions that took years to establish. And once lost, these positions would be extremely difficult to reclaim. The semiconductor and electronics industries would also experience severe disruption without access to Chinese rare earth supplies. Rare earth elements are irreplaceable materials in critical manufacturing processes. They're used in photoresists, which are light-sensitive materials essential for printing circuit patterns on silicon wafers. They're also used in sputtering targets, which are materials used to deposit thin films on chips during the manufacturing process. Consider Renesas Electronics, one of Japan's semiconductor giants. Its power chip production lines require approximately 100 tons of rare earth compounds each month just to maintain normal operations. If rare earth supplies were disrupted, chip prices would inevitably spike as existing inventories dwindled and production slowed. The development of Japan's planned 3-nanometer manufacturing process would lose momentum, causing Japanese companies to fall further behind Chinese and Korean competitors who maintain access to rare earth materials. Perhaps most concerning from a national security perspective is the role of rare earths in defense and strategic military systems. Precision gyroscopes used in missile guidance systems rely on rare earth elements for their performance characteristics. Microwave components needed for radar equipment depend on rare earth permanent magnets. These aren't commercial products with flexible supply chains, they're critical components of Japan's defense infrastructure. The mass production plan for Japan's Self-Defense Forces Type 12 anti-ship missile has already experienced delays due to uncertainty in rare earth availability. This kind of supply vulnerability directly threatens Japan's national security posture. The country simply has no feasible method to secure sufficient rare earth elements from alternative sources in the short term to meet defense requirements. A report from Japan's Ministry of Finance projected the broader economic impact. Over the next 5 years, the overall cost structure of Japan's high-tech industries is expected to rise by 15 to 22% if rare earth access remains constrained. This cost increase could render Japanese products uncompetitive in global markets. Even more dramatically, some defense-related procurement orders might shift to overseas suppliers if Japanese manufacturers cannot reliably deliver products due to material constraints. When we step back and assess the broader confrontation between Japan and China, a clear conclusion emerges. Japan holds no real advantage in this technological and economic standoff. The asymmetry of leverage becomes apparent when we examine what each country can deny the other. Japan's export restrictions certainly create challenges for Chinese semiconductor companies. They complicate procurement of certain manufacturing equipment and force Chinese firms to develop domestic alternatives more quickly than they might have preferred. However, these restrictions don't represent an existential threat to China's semiconductor industry. Chinese companies have demonstrated remarkable resilience and adaptability, finding alternative suppliers, developing indigenous technologies, and adjusting their strategies to work around restrictions. By contrast, China's potential rare earth restrictions could genuinely cripple major segments of Japanese industry. The automotive sector, electronics manufacturing, and defense production all face vulnerabilities that cannot be quickly addressed through alternative suppliers or technological substitution. This creates an asymmetric situation where China possesses leverage that Japan cannot match.